Wow, it's hard to believe that I've had this Jaguar now for over 2 years, and it's been about 18 months or 2 summers since my last video. So what I wanted to do today is give you guys an update. First off, it's a little bit chilly here in France, and so I'm not wearing the short shorts, but I really appreciate everyone making the comments about them. I will certainly be back to the short shorts as soon as possible. Wanted to give everyone an update on this car. Yes, I still have it. Want to talk a little bit about how it's been for the last 18 months, how much money I've had to spend on it. Has it been reliable? Has it not been reliable? I think that what's interesting is that I got this car with 48,000 kilometers on it. It now has 75,000 kilometers. So in the 2 years that I have had it, I have actually put 1/3 of the miles on this car in total. So I think that's quite unique, and I think that it's good to get this car back on the road more. The last update in the video, I had pretty much just had a big overhaul service done to it. So I'm gonna kind of pick up from that point and talk a little bit about the past 2 summers with this car. I would say that after the last video, the air conditioning stopped functioning and I took it back to where I had had it serviced and it needed some new fittings. So I think I spent about €1,000 on some fittings for the air conditioning because the low pressure line was not receiving the gas. Took it back for that. And this car had no problems up until I would say about 6 months ago. So 6 months ago, my wife and I went to Samur, which is about 2.5 hours from here, and we drove it. And on the way there, I had not been in the country and I hadn't driven the car in quite some time. So I noticed when we stopped to fill up with gas that the gas cap was missing. So of course I asked my wife, and she told me that she felt like someone took the cap in the streets of Paris. I quickly told her that the gas cap locked, so that wouldn't be possible. So then she determined that she must have left it somewhere. So ended up putting gas in the tank and not thinking anything else of it, just putting in my mind that I needed a note to get a new one. Well, that night, once we got to Samur, they had a absolute deluge, and the rain was incredible. And the next morning, when I went out to the car, of course, it wouldn't start because the gas cap, which of course the filler tank, which is on the very back of the car, had filled with water, so the car wouldn't start. So that's the first actual time this car would never start or left me stranded anywhere. And that was definitely user error. So had the car towed, and they drained the fuel tank, replaced the spark plugs, and we were on our way. And then quickly after that, maybe let's say right after that repair, my wife went to use the car to drive back to Paris. We are in the Loire Valley, so we are about 2.5 hours south of Paris. And she called me, and right when about an hour from our home, she called and said that the car was making some strange noises and that the steering was a little bit, shaky. So she pulled off the road. I asked her if the tires had air. She said yes. Ended up going to a mechanic, very luckily, who looked at the car quickly and determined that the wheel bearing had failed. And this was on the driver's side. So I had kind of assumed when I had the full service and when they had refreshed all of the rubber and the suspension components of the front end, I guess I wrongly assumed they had done the wheel bearings. I never heard any noise. I never heard any indication that the bearing was going out. I don't know how old the bearing was. If it had just failed, then I assume it wasn't replaced in the last round of large servicing. So anyway, the wheel bearing failed, and not only did it fail, but the car had to be towed because it damaged the hub. So the driver's side hub was damaged when the wheel bearing failed, so obviously it got too hot. I managed to have the car towed, and I found on a breakaway car online. Because this is a 1994, you can't get the front hub from just any XJ40. So I had to source a 1994 XJ40 hub. They sent it, it was installed. And then since then, when I picked the car up, the air conditioning stopped working. So I took the car right after I picked it up from having the hub fixed. I took it to have the air conditioning charged. They added dye to the system. I was taking the car at that point. It had been waiting for parts for over a month, and I was waiting to take a trip to Provence. So I had the air conditioning in this car charged. I went to Provence. It held a charge. I used the car, no problem. We are now 2.5 months later, and the charge has evacuated. So the system currently has a leak. So I would say that when the car filled up with gas, with the water in the gas tank, that was 350 euros plus towing. So not too bad. Then the hub plus installation and towing, another 500 euros. I had the air conditioning recharge. Let's say that's 80 euros. So all in all, you're somewhere around 1,700 euros in servicing over the last 18 months, 2 years. Overall, the impressions of this car on me, I'm still very charmed by the way that it drives. Since the last video, I also have a 2002 Jaguar XJR sedan, which is, of course, the car that came after this car with the supercharged V8 engine. And I will say that between the two of them, this car actually feels better on the freeway. It just feels more planted to the ground. And it just has more of a presence when you're driving it on the freeway. So I think that this has really been a great car for for long haul driving. My wife and I take it on a lot of trips throughout France. Like I mentioned, we drove it through to Provence and then up into Italy and came back. We just this past weekend drove it to Brittany and back. And I'm always charmed at some of the comments that people make about these cars because first off, I don't, YouTube is not the way that I make money. This was just, cars are a hobby of mine. And I found it quite unique that 20,000 people viewed my last video. So number one, that tells me that people are very nostalgic about old cars, especially these old Jaguars. And I think that the XJ40 has been the car that a lot of people have loved to hate for a long time. But as it turns out, I think these cars are obviously quite popular. And, from my standpoint, I still stand by the idea that you should buy the last of the model series that you can, so either a 1993 or a 1994. What I do notice a lot about most of the content on YouTube about XJ40s is that it's either about the V12 version, the XJ81, or which only came out in 1993 and 1994, which is the V12 version of this car, or you have the earlier models. So you have a lot of the, before the car went into the second generation in 1991, 1992. So a lot of the content is with the older cars. So I think that it's nice that there's some content on the newer cars, the last of the line. And this car's been a real pleasure. And I think that, the trips back and forth between Paris and the country, the seats are very comfortable. I've had a lot of older cars that have a lumbar support in the seat, and surprisingly, the lumbar support for the driver and the passenger seat still works in this car. So with all the adjustments that you're able to make to the seat, long haul driving is really nice. I don't feel tired when I get out of this car. I think that the way that the suspension is set up, of course, one of the things that when it goes in for service, I am going to have all of the bushings checked again, even though most of them have been replaced, because every now and then I do hear some noise from the front end suspension. So once it goes in, that will get looked at again. I know one of the things, people kind of stop driving these cars probably because there is a bushing that sits on top of the strut, and that bushing prevents vibration from the actuation of the wheel from coming into the cabin, and those need to be replaced. So lots of rubber in the front and rear suspension to make this car handle and drive the way that it does. I would say that it has held up quite well. I did have a major detail done to the car since the last time it was on video, and they did confirm that all of the paint was original. And I do drive it to Paris, and I do leave it outside, and where my apartment is outside, the street parking is covered in trees, and so there's a lot of bird poop that gets on the car, and if you don't wash it quickly, it will get etched into the clear coat. So I think that, of course, being 30 years old, the clear coat on this car is still very good. But when you leave the bird droppings and, you leave it outside without washing it, and you will get some damage to the clear coat. So I have kind of had to be a little bit more sensitive about it, and it is due for another annual detail. So I will say that about, let's say for the past 2 years, the annual maintenance is what, at 1,700 euros, so maybe around 2,000 US dollars, which is not bad. The car has been very reliable. Like I said, the only time that it did not start was when the wheel bearing failed. So I think what I'll do is I'll give you a quick overview of the inside, how it's worn in the last, let's say, 18 months. And then we will talk a little bit about the future plans that I have for this car. So I haven't done much to the inside. Every now and then I will use the leather wipe cloths on the seats. So interior is held up pretty well. The woodwork is still very good. The windows are not tinted on this car, so the leaving it outside, can damage the wood. Otherwise, car has been very easy to use. Like I mentioned, I think that it's been a fantastic car for road trips because it's really easy to pack a lot of things inside and drive. So I think that overall, thinking about it, I probably would have purchased the V12 version of the car. So what I'm thinking is I am not convinced about selling it, but a lot of people have sent me messages asking me if I would be interested in selling it. I am going to think about it over the coming weeks and make a determination whether or not I keep it or if I let it go to someone else and I try to find a V12 version. I am going to also be doing a video here soon on my 1994 W124 E320 estate, which is another story in itself. I fought for 3 years with the French customs authorities. I imported this car from the United States. It sat for 3 years, and the car has not had a service since it has sat, and we have been using it very sporadically. So 3 years no service, but the car shows no sign of slowing down. I will do a video on this car very soon. Thank you for watching, and I am still amazed at all of the interest that people have on these XJ40s. So I will look forward to an updated video here in the coming weeks.